to Pigskin Frenzy on this wonderful Tuesday afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joel Norris, and whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, or listening on Podbean, a big thank you for taking some time out of your Tuesday to just sit back, watch, and listen to some college football coverage presented by me. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like each episode, and leave comments down below. If you're listening on Spotify or Podbean, follow on there and share around with others as well. We have X, Facebook, and Instagram. All you got to do is type in Pigskin Frenzy, type it in, follow, like each page. You'll get episode updates, news, and highlights from across college and NFL football. There's trivia questions on Instagram stories. Go and answer today's, and you can get all things up to date for Pigskin Frenzy. College football day today, week 4 was exciting, eventful, and it was, I kind of had a word for the day for it, and it was exposure. So a lot of exposure, and we found out who, where teams stood and where teams, are currently heading into the last week of September and entering October. So we're going to go over a week 4 recap, breakdowns of the top 4 matchups that I talked about last week, and we're going to also go over and preview and predict the top matchups for week 5 coming up this Saturday. So subscribe to the channel once again. Keep plugging into Pigskin Frenzy on all platforms and follow on each platform as well. So before we go into week 5 and predict all these games, let's talk about week 4. Let's talk about what we saw, and we're going to kick it off right now with Florida State and Clemson. Florida State and Clemson, I said what they needed to do last week. Mike Norvell has not won a game against Clemson so far in his head coaching career, but now, after last week, he did. Close game. I said it was going to be close. Final score, Florida State 31, Clemson 24. Mike Norvell gets his first win against Clemson as a Florida State head coach. They go into Clemson, South Carolina in Death Valley and defeat them in overtime. Pretty good game. It was a close, back and forth there the whole way through. However, it was Florida State who got the last laugh. Let's look at what Jordan Travis did. Jordan Travis still dealing with that shoulder injury, and he looked kind of, he looked good, but he also had some moments where he was just, kind of not feeling it and kind of not there. So let's talk about Jordan Travis. 21 for 37 with 289 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 1 rushing touchdown. Trey Benson, their running back, had 7 carries with 25 yards and 3 receptions with 50 yards. Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman were factors in this game. Wilson had 5 receptions with 94 yards. Keon Coleman, the Michigan State transfer wide receiver, had 5 receptions with 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Florida State looked good on offense, but their defense was kind of getting, a little worn out, especially with Kay Klubnik and Will Shipley, running that offense. I said that they needed to, use Will Shipley on every aspect of the game, passing, in the passing game, in the rushing game, and they did. It wasn't enough, but they tried their absolute best. Kay Klubnik for Clemson, 25 for 38 with 283 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 13 carries with 10 yards and 1 touchdown. Will Shipley, he had 18 carries with 67 yards and 1 touchdown, as well as 4 receptions with 38 yards and 1 touchdown. Tyler Brown, the receiver, had 5 receptions with 84 yards. He was a big threat in the passing game. Overall about this game, I think it was a close back and forth affair. This obviously knocks out Clemson in the college football playoff hunt early, and I'm not used to seeing Clemson go out this early. It's different. It's a different vibe for what's going on with Clemson. I think that Garrett Wilson was a hot shot hire from last year's, TCU national championship runner-up team. TCU had a solid offense, and I believe that Clemson will have a solid offense. It just looks like Florida State in the ACC. This could be their year. Now there's 3 other teams along with Clemson, Miami, Duke, and North Carolina, and we're going to get to Duke in a minute. But Clemson just looks like it's just a year for them where, they're rebuilding a little bit more, and then they're going to have to, try to find a way to make, take it off again in the ACC. But this year is not their year. It's looking like Clemson's a good team, but it's not their year to, go, be in contention for the playoff, right? So it is the first time I've seen Clemson where they're not ranked either. So when you look at that and you just ponder that, you're like, wow, this is a weird year. I feel like we're in the twilight zone, and I felt like we were in the I still feel like we're in the twilight zone, and we just haven't got out yet. So Clemson not ranked. They're pretty much it's looking like they're out of the college football playoff hunt. Florida State, as for them, they showed signs of areas that they need to improve on. They obviously look like they are beatable. Along with everybody else in college football. I mean, everybody else this season is pretty much beatable, but Florida State looked like, they were solid against LSU, solid against Southern Miss. They kind of showed some flashes against Boston College, and then this Saturday against Clemson, they looked like they could have been headed for a loss as well. So it's one of those things where you look at it and you think about it and you ponder it. Not everybody's beatable, but two, Florida State looks like a team that probably needs to show some signs of improvement in some areas, or they could probably drop a game or two. So Florida State looks solid. They are the number 5 team in the nation. Congratulations to them. They final score 31-24. They rout Clemson in overtime, and Mike Norvell gets his first win as Florida State's head coach over Clemson, right? So first Clemson win for him. Congratulations to Florida State. They look good, but they are starting to show some areas where they need to improve on, especially when it comes to, starting fast. And I think that's a big improvement there. Starting fast, Florida State needs to be the key, because they haven't been starting fast the past few games. They've been started slow, and they had to, start to play a little bit more of catch up here recently in these past 2 weeks. So final score once again, Florida State 31, Clemson 24. Florida State still rocking it, still undefeated, still 4-0 as they head into the last weekend, the last week of September, heading into October, in the college football months, getting ready for the prime months of college football. So next game, Alabama-Ole Miss. This is a game I pondered on and we talked about last week. I said that Alabama needed to show a lot more consistency on offense, especially in the run game, not just in the throwing game, but in the run game. Let's run the ball a lot more. Ole Miss needed to show that, apply pressure to the quarterbacks, right? Apply a lot more pressure to Jalen Milroe. I said this was going to be close. It was close until in the very end, they ran away with it. So final score, Alabama 24, Ole Miss 10. Why am I shocked about that score? I thought this game was going to be a little bit closer on the scoreboard. I thought that Ole Miss was going to score a little bit more. I thought that Bama was going to keep it close, and I think it was going to be a last-minute field goal. I did think so. I got the outcomes right. I'm getting the outcomes right on these picks so far, ladies and gentlemen, but I thought Alabama looked like they were going to, end it with a field goal, but they didn't. They didn't. It was 24-10. And not only that, they ran the ball a lot more. So we're going to get into that. Let's get into Alabama. They ran the ball a lot more, which I was, like, okay, good for them. They're sticking to what needs to be, stuck to. Jalen Milroe, quarterback, Alabama for, opening game against Middle Tennessee State. Texas, and then he didn't play against South Florida because they were trying to test out Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson. But they went back for Milroe, and Milroe, 17 for 21 with 225 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. He did make a few mistakes in the game. He had 16 carries with 28 yards, but he's effective in the ground game. He did make a few mistakes in the air, and he made in his decision making, was a little, but listen, it was enough to get him by. It was enough to get them by. And that was the big thing. It was enough to get them by. Jalen Hale, their freshman wide receiver, 2 receptions with 63 yards and 1 touchdown. And let's talk about the ground game. The ground game is what their strength is. And I've said that. Listen, they do not have a Bryce Young at quarterback. That's not, throwing any shade at Alabama. They just don't have the quarterback like a Bryce Young out there in Tuscaloosa. They have 3 quarterbacks that could get them by, but they do not have a 5-star number 1 overall draft pick like a Bryce Young this season. They don't have a game-changing quarterback. They have quarterbacks that will help them win the game, but they have talent all around them. So what do? You build up to your strengths, right? You build up to the strengths. And that's the run game. I've said this. It's the run game. Jace McClellan, senior running back, he had 17 carries with 105 yards and 1 touchdown. Roydell Williams, had a solid rushing attack as well, along with Jalen Milroe. They had 131 rushing yards on the ground. I call this getting back to the basics, right? I mean, it's getting back to what made Alabama and made the dynasty work for Alabama for so long. Getting back to the basics. Throw when you need to. Yeah, the play action, pro style type quarterback play, but run the ball and run the rock and run it down their throats and make them stop it. And if you don't make, they can't stop it, you're going to make them quit. And that's what Tyler Smith was talking about. Make them quit. You got to make them quit. So getting back to the basics for Alabama, they're 131 rushing yards. Good win for Alabama here, and it was looking good for them. It wasn't looking good for them heading into the game. But then today, this past Saturday, when you look at them, they're like, oh man, they're looking like a little bit like Alabama again. So there's much more to improve on for Alabama. They didn't look too flashy, and they didn't look too good, but it wasn't bad. It was just kind of okay, right? So Bama won. Congratulations to them. Got back to the basics on the ground game. That's what they needed to do, and that's what led Ole Miss to this win over Ole Miss. Let's go over Ole Miss really quick. They did not play bad. It looks like, you think, okay, they played bad. They didn't play bad. Jackson Dart, 20 for 35 with 244 yards and 1 interception. 12 carries with 6 yards and 1 rushing touchdown. Jackson Dart, tried his absolute best, but that D-line was pressuring him. Alabama's front seven is still solid, and they're still one of the most talented in the SEC. So when you look at them and you look at that front seven applying pressure to Jackson Dart, he's going to make mistakes like throw the interception, like throw the ball away, and take a sack, right? Jackson Dart, he did the best he could, and he played a good game, right? I think he played a good game to the standard, and what he was, with the cards that was laid out in front of him with that front seven, right? So Jackson Dart, by no means, he went out, swinging, right? So Dayton Wade, their wide receiver, and Jordan Watkins, their other wide receiver, those receivers played solid. They didn't get any touchdowns, okay? They didn't get any touchdowns, but Dayton Wade, 5 receptions with 88 yards, and Jordan Watkins had 9 receptions with 57 yards. Quinshon Judkins, he, established a little bit more in the run game, 13 carries with 56 yards. My only thing with Ole Miss, and this is still it for me, establish the run game a lot more. You have a solid back in Quinshon Judkins, who's a monster. He was, in all honesty, the running back that was supposed to be the best running back coming back in the SEC, and he's just a little bit off to a slower start than usual, right? He's not averaging the 105 yards a game that he was getting, or 105 plus yards that he was getting in every game last season. But when you look at Judkins, he's a monster that could be in all aspects of the game, and you just got to utilize him more, right? So Judkins, he played good, but he wasn't utilized to the strengths like he usually is, and I feel like it can throw a little bit off the Ole Miss offense. Ole Miss's offense is capable of doing much, better things, right? Especially against Alabama's defense, against an LSU defense, against an A&M defense, you name it. But you got to establish what worked last season in some of those games, and that's Quinshon Judkins. He's got to be a factor in some of these games, and you got to, run the rock with him a lot more. When you establish the run game with Judkins, and then you get the throwing game going with Jackson Dart, who's going to stop that offense, right? It's going to be kind of hard. So Ole Miss, they showed some flashes, but it was not enough to get, the win over Bama in Tuscaloosa. Final score, Alabama 24, Ole Miss 10. Bama heading for a showdown at 8 o'clock this Saturday night on ESPN in Starkville against Mississippi State. State's coming off of a bye week after losing to LSU. And Ole Miss is going back home to Oxford with, speak of the devil, a showdown with LSU is looming Saturday. So 5 o'clock on ESPN, 6 o'clock Eastern on ESPN, 9 o'clock Eastern for State and Alabama on ESPN if you live on the East Coast. But yeah, it's all coming together here, for Ole Miss, State, Bama, and LSU. So four square is what we're playing here with these games. So moving on. Bama got the win 24-10. Moving on, we'll go over to these two games before we go over the AP poll and recap and preview and predict week 5. So, Oregon and Colorado. I was looking at this game. I was thinking to myself, okay, right, let's just, It's going to be close. It's going to be close, but I think Oregon is, just right now in the Pac-12 ahead of Colorado. Colorado is good, but they are not in it yet. They're not in it by no means yet. I mean, they got to, this is going to be a game where Colorado shows us something, right? Shows us what we're dealing with and what they need to work on and improve and what can they do moving forward. Then I saw Colorado walk into Autzen Stadium, and they were kind of, laid back, confident, a little bit too overconfident as they were scrubbing the Oregon logo. And it's by no means hating on Colorado. I hope they don't have a receipt for me, okay? I hope they don't. I am a believer in Colorado. I think Colorado's a talented team, and I think Deion Sanders is turning that program around. I really do. But when they did that and kind of were talking a little bit of trash to Oregon, that sparked Oregon a lot. Even so, if you want to go into the pregame speech, it's on ESPN's on video, on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, of Dan Lanning saying they're doing this for clicks. We're doing this for wins. That's showing, that they're fired up and they're ready to come to play. Well, they did, ladies and gentlemen. They did. It was one of those games where they never should have done that to Oregon. Final score, Oregon 42, Colorado 6. I was right about the outcome. I was wrong about the score and the game as a whole. It was all Oregon. It was all Oregon. There was no aspects of the game that was Colorado. No aspects of the game that was Colorado. It was all Oregon on offense, defense, special teams, all assets of the game. And I quote, Deion Sanders said that was an old-fashioned butt kicking. They were humbled that Saturday. They were humbled this past Saturday on ABC. So let's go with Oregon really quick. Bo Nix looking like the Heisman candidate that we always thought he was that everyone thought he was at Auburn, and going into Oregon. Bo Nix, super senior, 28 for 33 with 276 yards and 3 touchdowns with 1 interception. He also had 5 carries with 9 yards and a touchdown. Bo Nix done it all. His Heisman odds after this spiked up. Bucky Irvin, their running back, 10 carries with 89 yards. Jordan James, their other running back, 7 carries with 54 yards and 1 touchdown. Noah Whittington, 8 carries with 45 yards and a touchdown. He also, update on him, he suffered a left foot injury in the game this past Saturday against Colorado, and he could be out multiple weeks. That is according and announced by head coach Dan Lanning. Prayers for speedy recovery for Noah Whittington. Noah Whittington is a solid back for that Ducks offense and Ducks team, but he played a pivotal role in that win against Colorado. Troy Franklin, their wide receiver, 8 receptions with 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their tight end, Kelly for Oregon, it was also another factor. He got the last touchdown for Bo Nix. So, Oregon looking solid and looking like a prime threat in the Pac-12. I'm just saying. You look at SC and what they did against Arizona State. They played them close. Arizona State showed some fight and some heart. The biggest problem I have with USC is their defense still. I still have some questions about their defense, especially in the secondary. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But Oregon looks like the prime threat along with Washington in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 going out on a shield in its last season looks strong. I mean, there's some teams in the Pac-12 that are solid. USC, Oregon, and Washington all in the they're all in the top 10, all from the Pac-12, all in the top 10, all in the AP poll top 10. So Oregon looks solid. Let's go over Colorado. Shedeur Sanders was 23 for 33 with 159 yards and 1 touchdown. Anthony Hankerson, 5 carries with 31 yards. Dylan Edwards, 3 carries with 21 yards. Xavier Weaver, 9 receptions with 75 yards. Michael Harrison, 3 receptions with 22 yards and a touchdown. That was the only touchdown for Sanders and Michael Harrison. That was it. That was all they got. I mean, they delivered their best. I think they came into the game overconfident, and they came into the game with a little bit of an attitude about, they bought into the hype of, okay, they're coming. It's Colorado, Coach Prime, Deion Sanders. They look solid, and they're still a solid football team, but when you look at them, they came in a little bit too overconfident, and they came in a little bit too, I guess cocky would be the right word. But Colorado was humbled a little bit Saturday, and what can they take away from this? They can come back with a little bit more humility, with a little bit more respect for their opponents, and that can also bleed onto the field, which means, hey, we'll make it a more respectable game and closer game, and we'll compete with you guys a lot more. I think Colorado is a solid team, and I think this team, with the talent that they got, could have competed with Oregon. They could have. You're thinking, okay, you're crazy. Oregon has Bo Nix, Bucky Irving, Troy Franklin. But you got to think, though, their defense is solid. Their defense is lights out. Dan Lanning, a wonderful defensive coach. But when you look at them, Oregon is, they got the talent, but there's teams out there that can compete with Oregon. Oregon's a solid team, and they're one of the top teams in the country. But Colorado, talent-wise, has the team to compete with them. They just didn't play it's all a mental thing. They didn't play to their strengths, and they didn't show the amount of right respect going into Autzen to play against this team. That's why they got beat so bad. It's all a mental thing. They got beat because they didn't show the right amount of respect and proper humility for their opponent. And that's why it bled onto the field. And they didn't play to their strengths, and that's why they only scored 6 points, and it was 42-6. Dan Lanning was fired up, and he was ready to run the score even more. It's all about respect. You got to show respect in these games, and it was an ultimate disrespect type of thing. And Oregon 42, Colorado 6, and that was the final result. All Oregon Saturday. What does this mean for Colorado? A showdown with USC is looming Saturday in Boulder. Home game for them. We got to see where they go from here, but going into this game is a tough look. Very, very tough look. SC came off of a good win against Arizona State. It was kind of SC showed some questions too. USC showed some questions too, but in the very end, they kind of ran away with it and got the win over Arizona State. So, final score: Oregon 42, Colorado 6. Oregon looks like a powerhouse in the Pac-12. Colorado drops back a bit after a tough loss against Oregon, but I believe that they will be okay. I do. I'm a believer in Colorado. They just got to show a little bit more humility and a little bit more respect towards their opponent. That's all. So, final score 42-6. Colorado routs Oregon big time. So, didn't see that one coming. Moving on, Ohio State, Notre Dame before we go to the polls and before we talk about Week 5 and preview and predict these games. Ohio State and Notre Dame. I was wrong about the outcome. I got this pick wrong. Back and forth game. Notre Dame was leading the whole game. For pretty much the whole game. No, I'm sorry. I apologize. Ohio State was leading it first, 10-0. Then Notre Dame sparked a comeback. It was 14-10. 14-10. Back and forth until the end. Final score, though, on the very last second, Ohio State 17, Notre Dame 14. Ohio State routs Notre Dame and gives Notre Dame its first loss. Ohio State looked good. Kyle McCord played a phenomenal. He played a solid game. He didn't really play how he did against Western Kentucky, obviously, but he played enough and played well enough to get the job done. They played with toughness, and that is what they needed to win this game. So, let's talk about it. Kyle McCord, 21 for 37, 240 yards. Emeka Egbuka, go-to man for this one. 7 receptions with 96 yards and 2 carries with 9 yards. Another go-to guy, a couple more go-to guys was Cade Stover and Marvin Harrison Jr. Cade Stover, 7 receptions with 52 yards. They're tight end. Marvin Harrison Jr., their star wide receiver, 3 receptions with 32 yards. He also left the game and came back with an ankle injury. We'll have more updates on that. His ankle looks a little bit beat up, and that could play a factor as, showdowns with Penn State loom, and then later in the season, Michigan looms. So we're going to have to see what Marvin Harrison does, but that ankle, that's something to keep an eye on. I mean, he looked hurt in the Notre Dame game, so that's going to something to keep an eye on for Marvin Harrison, and it's something to, to keep up to date with. So I will get up to date with that. The running game with Ohio State looks solid. They look solid in the running game. It was led by DeMonte Trainium and TreVeyon Henderson. TreVeyon Henderson, he had 14 carries with 104 yards and a touchdown. DeMonte Trainium, DeMonte Trainium, 6 carries with 13 yards and a touchdown, and 1 reception with 12 yards. Trainium had the last-second go-ahead touchdown. It was 10-14. Ohio State led a game-winning drive. Kyle McCord throwing the ball down. Marvin Harrison, clutch play. Clutch pass, he caught it. First down in the red zone. Another another pass caught by Harrison. First down, first and goal. They were, seconds left. It was about 4 seconds left in the game. Tranium was in the backfield. They handed it off to him, and he got it in for the go-ahead touchdown to ice the game. There was 1 second left. Kickoff, they had to do a PAT, then kickoff, and then Notre Dame was trying to lateral, and they couldn't get it off. It was 17-14 Ohio State over Notre Dame. Classic game and a good way to end the game in South Bend. Ohio State looked solid. Ryan Day looked fired up after the comments that legendary head coach Lou Holtz did, and said to him about, Notre Dame and how Ohio State wasn't as tough. That kind of fired him up a little bit. I would be fired up as well. They looked good in the ground game. I think the ground game is kind of what led them to win this football game. I think the ground game was a big piece of the puzzle for Ohio State's offense this past Saturday. Sam Hartman and Notre Dame. Let's talk about Sam Hartman. He did not play bad. He played good. He played like he was, giving it his all on the field in South Bend. Sam Hartman, 17 for 25 with 175 yards and a touchdown. Audric Estime, he did okay, but it wasn't enough, enough ground on the ground for Ohio State. I expected a little bit more on the ground for Notre Dame. I apologize. For Notre Dame, I expected a little bit more for them. Audric Estime, 14 carries with 70 yards. Jabron Payne had 6 carries with 18 yards and 1 touchdown. Mitchell Evans, their wide receiver, Mitchell Evans, 7 receptions with 75 yards. And Jaden Greathouse, 2 receptions with 40 yards, 1 carry and 3 yards as well on the ground. Their ground game was okay, but they leaned more on Sam Hartman throwing the ball, and he did good throwing the ball. They had some good plays in the air, but I feel like the balanced attack, kind of slowed down in the second half. I feel like Notre Dame, the problem with Notre Dame was they took their foot off the gas. I feel like they had all the momentum in this game, but they just took their foot off the gas, right? I think it was one of those games where Notre Dame had them, and they slowed down, and then Ohio State just kind of played catch-up and caught back up, and they got motivated. They saw that as weakness for Notre Dame, and they took advantage of it, and they scored the go-ahead touchdown. It was a back-and-forth game overall. Notre Dame still in the playoff hunt, still in national championship contention. Obviously, Ohio State is as well. Ohio State in the top 4 now, technically, because they're number 4. But final score, 17-14. Ohio State edges Notre Dame out close. I said it was going to be a close game. Thought it was going to be a lot more of a high-scoring game, but it wasn't. A low-scoring game on both ends. Their defenses played well, and the ground game is what was, what sold me for Ohio State in this one. So Ohio State 17, Notre Dame 14. Ohio State going to keep rocking and rolling. Notre Dame has got a big showdown coming up Saturday in Durham, North Carolina against Duke Blue Devils, as they are also undefeated. So let's get to the polls. That was our recap of week 4. We're going to go to the polls really quick and just discuss, read off the polls and then preview and predict week 5 of college football matchups, the top matchups, heading into Saturday. So, number 1, obviously, Georgia. 4-0, they beat UAB. Not a big shocker there. Number 2, Michigan. They routed Rutgers in the return game of Jim Harbaugh. Welcome back for him. Texas, they defeated Baylor. They are number 3. Ohio State jumps 2 spots from 6 to 4. They jump USC, and they jump Florida State. Number 4, Ohio State, after a phenomenal win against Notre Dame. That's a resume win for them in their playoff hunt, right? Number 5, Florida State. They drop 1 spot after keeping it close with Clemson. They showed some good signs, but they also showed some signs where they needed to improve, like I said before. Florida State at number 5. Penn State, number 6. Here comes the Nittany Lions. They routed Iowa this past weekend, and they look good in that whiteout game in Happy Valley. Penn State's going to be a problem, okay? And I'm just going to say this now. Keep an eye on Drew Allard in that offense. They're going to be a problem for Michigan and or Ohio State. That's a team that they're going to have to come to play. So Penn State not going anywhere anytime soon. They're going to be a threat in the Big Ten race this season. Washington at 7. Washington at 7. Good a rout of California. They look solid on offense. USC at 8. They dropped 3 spots from 5. They were at 5. My mistakes. They were at 5. They went from 5 to 8. USC looked good, but also, looked a little bit slow on defense. And I think that's what happened. And that's why they dropped from 5 to 8 and they dropped so far. So they looked a little slow against Arizona State, but they picked it up in the end and, ran away with it in the end. Oregon, number 9, they went from 10 to 9 after a, pretty harsh win over Colorado. It was a harsh win. Big win for them. They're number 9 as, they enter fully into the top 10. Utah at 10. Look at the Pac-12 representing the top 10. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 teams from the Pac-12 in the top 10, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Washington, USC, Oregon, and then Utah, all representing, all undefeated. Utah has a big game coming up this Friday night against Oregon State. We're going to get to that in a minute. Number 11, Notre Dame. They dropped 2 spots from number 9 to 11 as they lost a close one against Ohio State, so not dropping too far. Alabama with an impressive win, coming in at 12. They jump LSU. LSU and Bama flip-flop. LSU played a tough game against Arkansas this past Saturday, and they played them tough. Arkansas is a good team, but the penalties is what drove Arkansas, to that loss against LSU. LSU looks solid. Bama looks solid also. They just flip-flop. Alabama at 12, LSU at 13. Oklahoma, 14. They look solid against Cincinnati. They looked really, really good, 4-0, as they are as a Texas showdown looms here in the next few weeks. So, number 15, North Carolina at 15 coming in there. They go up 2 spots. They were at 17, but they move up to 15 after an impressive win this past Saturday. Washington State, Wazoo. Cameron Ward, solid and underrated quarterback in the Pac-12. They have a lot of good quarterbacks in the Pac-12, by the way. With Caleb Williams, Shadur Sanders, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., Cam Rising, if he returns, and I hope he returns, DJ Uiagalelei, and Cameron Ward from Wazoo, man. I mean, they all just look solid, don't they? They look so good. And Wazoo looked really good against Oregon State. They played tough. Jake Dickert, their head coach, solid coach, and they had a phenomenal game plan against Oregon State. Close game, Wazoo at 16 after a huge win. They were at 20. They moved to 16. Number 17, Duke. The Duke Blue Devils. Riley Leonard looks solid. That's a team that I would watch out for heading into this Saturday's game. That's going to be a packed out house. Durham, North Carolina, College Game Day is going to be there, and Notre Dame's coming to town, for a showdown there. So Riley Leonard, 4-0 with Duke. They are at 17. Miami, the U, 4-0. They look solid. Number 18. They move up 2 spots from 20 to 18. Miami looks solid as well. Number 19, Oregon State. They dropped 5 spots. They went from 14 to 19. Oregon State still in it. It was a close game, but they lost to Wazoo. They dropped to 19. Oregon State still in it, though. Ole Miss is now at 20. They went from 15 to 20 after I would say a pretty moderate loss to Alabama. They tried hard, but it wasn't enough to completely drop them out of the rankings, I would assume. So Ole Miss goes from 15 to 20. Tennessee bounces back up a couple of spots. They went from 23 to 21. They jumped Florida, the team that they defeated, right? The team, they're still ahead of Florida, the team that Florida defeated. So 21 Tennessee, 22 is Florida. They move it from 25 to 22 after an impressive win against Charlotte this past Saturday. Missouri at 23, they enter the rankings finally. They look solid. They beat Memphis pretty good. Missouri 23, as they got a good couple of games, especially a showdown with LSU coming up on October 7th next week. So Kansas, number 24, Kansas, they're 4-0. They look good. Jalen Daniels looks like a threat in the Big 12. They look like they could, make a run at Texas or Oklahoma or Kansas State in that conference. So 24, Kansas at 4-0. They look solid. Go Jayhawks, Rock Chalk Jayhawks, by the way. And number 25, Fresno State in the Mountain West at 4-0. Fresno State playing some good football out there in the group of 5. So they're number 25, and that rounds up the AP Top 25 polls. So as we get ready for Week 5 preview and predictions, we're going to kick it off with Utah at Oregon State, and that game's Friday night on ESPN. So when you look at these two teams, it's a top 20 matchup here, 10-19, Utah coming into town. Now, loud, packed out, packed out, stadium in Beavertown. Here we go. So Utah, they have to shut out the crowd noise. This is the key game for Utah. They got to shut out that crowd noise. It's going to be packed. It's going to be loud. Jonathan Thomas is going to be, get them ready. He's going to get them pumped and ready, to play a solid Utah team. And a key for Oregon State is you got to be more physical up front. For Oregon State, you got to be more physical up front against Utah. And I think that's the biggest key for Oregon State. If they are more physical up front against Utah, they can win this football game, and they can prove that they are, still in it in the Pac-12, championship hunt. So there's a lot of good teams in the Pac-12. This is the most interesting season so far, especially with realignment and everything for the Pac-12. So Utah has to shut out the crowd noise, and Oregon State has to be more physical up front. So who do I have winning this one? Friday night, gonna be a close one. It's gonna be a very close one. I think Utah routs Oregon State. I think it's a close game. I think Oregon wins 42. I think Utah beats Oregon State. Utah wins 42-35. Or Utah 42, Oregon State 35. They rout the Beavers and they improve to 5-0. And Oregon State goes to 3-2 on the season. Utah 42, Oregon State 35. Coming up Friday night. USC at Colorado. This game is going to be interesting, especially after what happened to Colorado against Oregon this past Saturday. So USC started off slow and was pretty slow in the Arizona State game, but Colorado also got routed by Oregon pretty badly. So it's one of those things where what's going to happen here? Who could we? This game is probably going to be unpredictable heading into Boulder this Saturday morning. So USC at Colorado. Key for USC is their secondary versus Colorado's wide receivers. Can their secondary hold up against Xavier Weaver, and can they hold up against Michael Harrison, and can they hold up against, a lot of these guys, right? Especially Xavier Weaver. So can they hold up against Colorado's wide receivers? That's the key for USC's, in this game. Colorado's mentality after losing to Oregon is Colorado's key. And I think that what's their mentality going to look like? Are they going to show more respect to USC? Are they going to show a little bit more humility going into this game? Because if they do, they can play to their strengths, and they could probably keep this game a lot close and could potentially pull it out a big-time upset in Boulder this Saturday. USC at Colorado. Who do I have winning this game? I have USC winning it close. I think it's going to be close. I think this game will be a lot closer than everyone thinks it's going to be. Everyone's thinking they just got done getting beat down by Oregon. They can't do it. It's not their year, and it may not be their year. And I think they're probably going to lose this game, but I think they're going to play a lot close. I think if they play to their strengths and they show respect, they can, either play them close or who knows, pull out an upset. But I think USC gets them. I think the dynamic factor with Caleb Williams and with the new receivers, Darius Branch, man. There's Zachariah Branch. Yeah, Zachariah Branch. That combo right there. They got Brennan Rice. They got Marshawn Lloyd. A lot of those guys on the offense are solid for the Trojans. I think they rout Colorado. I think they win 35-24. USC 35, Colorado 24. Coming up Saturday morning in Boulder. So 35-24, USC defeats the Buffaloes, but Colorado plays a lot better than they did against Oregon, and they show a little bit more, toughness and play to their strengths coming up this Saturday. So two more games. LSU at Ole Miss, the Magnolia Bowl in the SEC West. Going to be a good one, I think. I think it's going to be very, very close. I mean, we got 3-1 Ole Miss, 3-1 LSU. They both look solid, right? They both look solid. 3-0 Ole Miss, 3-1 Ole Miss, 3-1 LSU. Going to Oxford for this one. Ole Miss coming off of a tough loss against Alabama. LSU coming off of two strong back-to-back wins against Mississippi State and Arkansas. Here are my questions, and this is for LSU. The secondary versus Ole Miss wide receivers. Now, I normally wouldn't question LSU secondary because everybody's talking about DBU. They had Matthew and Claiborne and Peterson and all these legends in the secondary for LSU. But when you look at them lately, the transfers that are coming in, they're young. You got Deuce Chestnut, Zy Alexander, Andre Sam, you got Denver Harris up there. They got a lot of young guys that have come in, but is it enough? Because the past couple of games, and especially against Arkansas, they kept getting beat out by these receivers. So, and it's nothing against Arkansas. Arkansas is a tough squad, but they, and a lot of this, was caused by penalties. If it wasn't for the 13 penalties by Arkansas, which I think they lead the league in penalties in the SEC currently, but that's Arkansas. But if it wasn't for those penalties, what would that game would have looked like? They have a solid offense. LSU's offense, I don't have any questions about their offense. I don't have any questions about their mid linebackers. I don't have any questions about their front seven. The only question I have right now about their team, or two things really. More so the running game on offense, but also they're getting the running game cleaned up, but they're secondary against receivers. And I think that's my biggest key for LSU. Can they play a much better game covering Ole Miss's wide receivers? Because they got Dayton Wade and they got Jordan Watkins, who were solid for Ole Miss. And the key for Ole Miss, they need to get the ground game going with Judkins. I've said that before, but I really think so now. I think if they get the ground game going with Quinshon Judkins and he plays a factor in this game, it's going to open up a little bit more in the passing game against the secondary, and then LSU could be on their heels a little bit. This is a trap game for LSU. LSU's favored in this one. Trap game for them, though. Solid team against Ole Miss. Going to be a big-time game come 6 Eastern on ESPN. Who do I have winning this game? I have LSU pulling it out close. I think LSU avoids the upset. Close. They beat Ole Miss, but it's going to be, I think it's going to be close. I will say a field goal win. I'll say LSU 38, Ole Miss 35. It's not going to be a blowout by any means. Close, back and forth affair. LSU gets the game-winning field goal with Damian Ramos doing probably what he did this past Saturday against Arkansas, getting the win there. 38-35, LSU defeats Ole Miss and gets the win and moves to 4-1, while Ole Miss moves to 3-2. Final game before we conclude today's episode of Pigskin Frenzy, Notre Dame at Duke. This game I have been waiting for quite some time. Notre Dame 3-1, Duke 4-0. Audric Estime, Sam Hartman, all those guys coming up and taking on Riley Leonard and the Duke Blue Devils. Here is the keys to this game. There's two keys to this game, and one big key for Duke. So keys to the game for Notre Dame: get Audric Estime back on track in the ground game. Establish the ground game hard for this one, and I would assume, you would do just fine. Run a little bit more misdirections on the outside, and then just force them to quit, right, on defense. Establish the ground game and get the running game back on track with Audric Estime. And number two, don't let your foot off the gas and keep going. When you are scoring and you keep on going, you don't pump the brakes. You accelerate. You keep floor the gas, and keep on going on offense for Notre Dame. That's the two keys for Notre Dame to win this ball game. For Duke, it's simple. Riley Leonard keeps playing like he's been playing. He plays lights out. Riley Leonard's one of the most underrated quarterbacks, not only in the ACC, but in college football itself. I think if Riley Leonard plays the way he's been playing, and he plays solid and plays with heart and compassion, that Duke Blue Devil offense is scary, and they could trick up a lot of people. So he's a good dual threat quarterback, plays with heart and compassion. Who do I have winning this game? Close back and forth game. I say Notre Dame gets the win over Duke. Close. It's going to be, Notre Dame's going to get a win back. Going to be close. I think Notre Dame wins 35-31. 35-31. 35 Notre Dame, Duke 31. They play a compassionate field heart game, but it's not enough to get the win over Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has a little bit more talent than Duke, and this is what's going to get them the win over Duke. Notre Dame 35, Duke 31, and Notre Dame improves to 5-1, and Duke improves to 4-1, or goes down to 4-1. So that just about does it for Pigskin Frenzy. A big thank you for taking some time out of your Tuesday to just sit back, watch, and listen to some college football coverage presented by me. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like each episode, and leave comments down below. Spotify and Podbean, if listening on there, share around with others, and follow on there as well. X, Facebook, and Instagram, just type in Pigskin Frenzy. Follow and like the pages there. You'll get episode updates. You'll get news and highlights from across college and NFL football. There's trivia questions on Instagram stories. Go and answer today's. Make sure you answer those, as well as all things up to date for Pigskin Frenzy. Big thank you again. Thursday, we are going to recap week 3 of the NFL season. Look ahead to the top matches of week 4. Dolphins, they look pretty good. You're going to have to, just wait and see what I have to say about that coming up Thursday. They look solid. And, what's happening up in Kansas City, right? What's happening up in Kansas City? We're going to talk about that as well. Big thank you for taking some time out of the day. I'm Joel Norris signing off. We will see you Thursday for another edition, for an NFL edition of Pigskin Frenzy. And for everybody out there, stay the course.